So what happened when, I know you can't remember much of this, Keith, but what happened when you were actually in the hospital?
Well, as far as I'm aware, I was put into an induced coma for 2 to 3 days. And my body's chilled, and I was told that was to give my vital organs a rest. And then I was told that I was due, and that was intensive care. And when I was in high dependency, I have no recollection of that at all, but I was doing stupid things like climbing out the bed with the sides up and wandering all over the place. And one of the retired GPs I had when I was in Harvard said that was normal because of the amount of drugs that was pumped into you. And first memory I was basically being in Ward 20.
And what, Katie, for you, what was it like watching? Because you were presumably with Keith when he was in the intensive care unit?
I was. The first vivid memory I can remember actually was sitting in the accident and emergency unit of Aberdeen Royal Infirmary. Just after Keith had been admitted, and I was sitting in we were taken to the relatives waiting room, and I was called through, and I saw Keith in absolute state, and we were very, very lucky the night. The person who was the doctor who was on the admissions that evening, it was thanks to him that I kept my cool in some retrospect, insofar as he said that somebody like Keith had been admitted 3 weeks earlier, and that very morning he had walked out under his own steam from the hospital. So I just clung on to that the whole time that Keith was in the hospital. Otherwise, I just don't think I could have coped at all, to be perfectly honest with you, because seeing a loved one, in the mess that he was, and I was all set for taking his clothes home to wash and things, and the nurse says no, they're going straight into the incinerator and things, and I thought, oh, well, fair dues, but. No, it wasn't. It was horrible. I didn't know what to do, and I phoned up my mother in a panic, and she said, "Well, there's nothing I can do. I'm down here in Edinburgh, and you're up here in Aberdeen. Can you not phone up Keith's, one of Keith's nice cousins who live in Aberdeen, and they'll come and help you out?"
So you got some support from
So I got support from Keith's family. Well, 2 of Keith's family work in Aberdeen Royal Infirmary anyway, so I got support from them. Yes,
So you were in accident emergency, and then presumably Keith got transferred up to the intensive care unit?
Up to the intensive care unit, yes.
And what was it like for you when he was in the intensive care unit?
It was horrid actually, because poor Keith took a reaction to one of the drugs from the cath lab, and so he had a very, very fat bottom lip. I remember, and he
thought you were going to say something else.
A very fat bottom lip, and it was difficult for him to keep his tubes and things in. But because he was sound asleep, and he was just attached to all these sort of monitors and things. But I mean, I'm so used to seeing having trained as a nurse myself. I'm so used to these monitors and things, and I knew what they all meant. And it was quite interesting, as far as I know. It sounds awful, but it's quite interesting instead of watching all these monitors and things, because I knew he was all right. Mm-hmm. And he was just lay there, and he had a blue, like one of these ice pack things like you have in your cool bag, and he had one of those underneath him and one of those on top of him. And it was just like being in a deep freeze for 72 hours.
So at that stage, did you think everything's going to be okay?
Yes, I guess I knew everything was going to be okay. I really genuinely did, because I was able to work out his observations were stable. All the nurses round about him were absolutely fantastic. So just having to give his whole body as a rest, just to get him back to normal again.
So he was in intensive care for.
He was in intensive care for 3 days.
3 days, and then moved to.
Yes, I would say the worst bit about him being in intensive care was not for me per se, but for his elderly father. It was far worse for Dad than it was for
Was that
me.
because you were a nurse and you knew about the environment?
Yes,
for him
yes.
Alien.
It wasn't alien. It wasn't necessarily alien to Dad, because he had been in and out of hospital himself for various things. But I just thought, because Keith and his father were very, very close after his mother died, because they lived together for 7-8 years before I came on the scene, and so they were very, very close, the two men, and it was just heartbreaking for Dad. It really was.
So you had to sort of support
Yes,
him
I
as
had
well.
to support him. So I had to move in with my father-in-law whilst Keith was lying in the hospital, which I found quite a strange thing to have to do. But there was nothing else I could do at the time.
So then he got moved to was it just the general coronary ward? Just for,
Yes, yeah.
for
Well, he was in high dependency for about 5 days. I think you were in high dependency for, and then you were put onto a normal ward before I was allowed to bring him home.
So it was the high dependency unit where the drugs were really kicking
Yes,
in. And
they were really kicking in, and he was an absolute nightmare in the hospital for the poor night porters, I think, because they never knew where they were going to find him next, and he pulled out all his wires and all his drips and everything, and he was an absolute nightmare. But he was quite, if you asked him a question, he was quite compos mentis, and his cousin used to come in and see him whenever he was on duty, and he could have a conversation quite normally with him. Although Keith claims he doesn't know anything about it, but
so you had no concerns at the time about any brain deficits or anything?
no, there was nothing. I was just worried about him being do worried, so I phoned up his doctor cousin, and I was told just to go home and stop worrying, because it was just quite normal.
Yeah.
So we were very lucky in retrospect, because we had family with medical backgrounds, and so they were able to tell us exactly what was going on. We had people who were able to ask the doctors all the relevant questions, because I wouldn't know what to ask.
No.
So if ever there was a consultation with any of the staff, Dad and I always used to ask for either Keith's cousin or his wife to be in on the consultation with us, so all the requisite questions could be asked. So I suppose in that way we were probably luckier than some people are, because we did have a lot of support during from the very word go.